All right, hi everyone. It's so great to see all of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Jen Ferrari, the proud CEO of ERDI, and each month we have this great pleasure of bringing members of the ERDI community together to just talk about what's on top of our mind and some of the learnings that we've had along the way, so that in this crazy environment and these crazy times, we can use our collective wisdom and our learnings to help advance the entire crew. So I'm very excited to have a great duo here today. I'm going to start with introducing Parsa Rezvani, who's the CEO of Go School Box, one of our collaborators, and he in turn will introduce Dr. Erica Avila from Isaac District in Arizona. This is meant to be a great opportunity to ask questions. We invite you to be collaborative and engage in conversation, and this is going to be a really compelling case study about how high dosage tutoring really made a difference during the pandemic in Arizona. So with no further ado, Parsa, thanks so much for joining us, kick us off, and I'm looking forward to learning alongside all of you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, for having us here today. I do have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Erica Avila. She's the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning at the Isaac School District in Phoenix, Arizona. So I just started sharing my screen. Hopefully you all can see that here. And today, Dr. Avila will be talking about that exact case study that Jennifer was referring to, about how she identified, implemented, managed, and continues to scale her high dosage tutoring program to accelerate ELA and math gains. So today we have about 35 minutes to chat. And so we'll mainly be focusing on the ELA aspect of things. And hopefully Dr. Avila, since she doesn't always toot her own horn, but actually a couple weeks ago, the great news came out that one of the schools in this case study was actually taken from an F-rated school to a B-rated school in just under 2 years, with the great work that she's doing at her district. By way of introduction, as Jennifer said, my name is Parsa Rezvani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Go School Box, and we had the pleasure of partnering with Dr. Avila on this project. So Dr. Avila, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Parsa, and welcome everyone. Today, my goal is to provide insights on how we launched our high dosage tutoring program so that anyone interested can replicate upon the work we've done. And before I get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the Isaac School District. We have 12 schools, 7 K-5 buildings, 1 K-8 building, 2 middle schools, 1 preschool, and now 1 virtual school. Over 90% of our students are Latino. Almost 30% are labeled as English language learners, and 98% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we are a Title I district. With over 5,000 students and 20 administrators, we have 44 cabinet members and 5 governing board members. Before we get into the case study, I really want you to understand what was happening at the time. So I want to paint this picture to set the tone of what we were dealing with. So on March 3rd, 2021, our governor issued a new executive order. All schools must return to in-person teacher-led instruction by March 15th. The good news was we were already prepared. We were already preparing to open. We originally had a start date of March 22nd, but we had taken the steps. Communication went out. Teachers were gearing up. We were preparing our classrooms. We had our district return to learn plan and all of our mitigation procedures. We ordered all the masks we could get our hands on, face shields, all the dots and the arrows you have to put on the floor, hundreds of pounds of hand sanitizer. We were set. And know that our surrounding districts were not planning to open. The plan was for all schools to remain closed to the end of the school year. But with such a high poverty community, our parents, our families needed to get back to work. There was no luxury of work from home or remote work. They needed to get back to work. So we needed to open the buildings to get our students back to school. So what happens when you start to panic and you don't know what to do? You start calling folks that you know who can help you. So I thought of the ERDI network, and I thought, what a better connection, Dr. Ferrari, SOS, we need help. And so part of our plan was, as we were working with the teachers, we knew we needed more than just our standards-based quality tier 1 instruction. We're trying to recover from over almost 2 years of unfinished learning. We needed intense intervention. So we thought, let's do tutoring, intense tutoring. But using research put out in February 2021 by the Annenberg Institute at Brown University and University of Virginia, there they talked about and defined high dosage tutoring. So now I'm looking for tutors, but which tutors are ready to go March 2021? So using the ERDI network, she sent us a few tutoring companies and said, you know what, we have a new partner, Parsa Rezvani. There was another partner that we also partnered with, FEV Tutor, and we scheduled those demos for the first week of March. Our goal was to select the vendor, identify a school site, and get a principal on board and ready to implement before spring break. So spring break's the second week of March. Unfortunately, none of us were on vacation. We were in the building, ramping up, making sure that we had our sound bars and our mics for teachers. If you look at this picture here, in the classroom, the teacher has students in front of her, but then also half of the class was virtual online. And what we did was we just had them rotating. That's how we reduced the class sizes. So we had our set criteria in looking for a partner. We had the curriculum. We knew that we needed to put in front of the students for the intense tutoring. We were looking for a culturally responsive staff, excellent customer service, immediate response time, but most critical was a vendor who could launch a program in 2 weeks. We were looking for a partner who could run as fast as we could. So here comes the third week of March, and I called Parsa and I said, hey, can we launch in 2 weeks? And he said, absolutely. So we launched high dosage tutoring intervention on April 5th of 2021. So for those of you thinking, well, what does high dosage tutoring look like in action? Here's a very brief video of high dosage tutoring in action. So what you're going to see are the students sitting in the classroom. You see the teacher in the back of the class working with the student one-on-one. The students open their Chromebooks, connect with the tutors online. There were 12 virtual tutors. And what we did was we made room in the master schedule. We called it Learning Lab. And 4 days a week for 40 minutes a day, each student logged in with their tutor and they were in small groups. Some groups went up to 4 to 1, but the typical groups of students to tutors was either 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. Okay. Now I want to take your attention to our case study. Our focus at Isaac was to address the unfinished learning from the almost 2 years of virtual learning in both ELA and math. We first targeted our tutoring program at ELA because we saw more of a learning loss in ELA over that first year of the pandemic. On the left side of the screen here, you will see School A with almost 600 students who participated in the high dosage tutoring. Students received 40 minutes in small group settings 4 times a week, and the content was aligned to power standards. School B provided tutoring that was not aligned to power standards and only included some students. And School C did not receive any tutoring at all. They returned to learning with a focus just on that tier 1 instruction, and the teachers were focused on improving the quality of instruction in the classroom. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen that in addition to the results, we could view on the Go Schoolbox platform multiple pieces of data, from the ongoing assessments that the tutors administer to our ERDI benchmarks administered 3 times per year, and the state assessment, which is administered annually. And we did this to ensure that all 3 assessments pointed to the same outcomes and add confidence to our data and conclusions. I also want to share that before we chose any tutoring vendor through our RFP process, there were 3 questions that we knew that we were going to have to answer when the board asked. First, which services were being utilized and by whom? So for those of you in districts, some schools, they have different programs and services than other schools, and we needed a way to track that. Secondly, we wanted both quantitative and qualitative data. Yes, of course, the student scores mattered. Of course, practicing or monitoring the progress of the student achievement, of course that matters, but we know that coming back from the pandemic, what did everyone start talking about? The social emotional well-being of the students and of the staff. So we also wanted to track the qualitative data about how students were feeling about the services provided, as well as from our staff. And last, if we're implementing solutions with more than one vendor across multiple schools, which is what we did, we had multiple vendors in different schools, and they were trying different approaches, we wanted to analyze the return on investment in one place or in one platform. From day one, Parsa helped us to structure our high dosage tutoring program by utilizing the Go Schoolbox platform. I asked Parsa to put these headings here on the right so I can describe how I utilized this platform. So first and foremost is support. If you run a new program, you want to make sure there's a customer success team that's not only available for us at central office, but for all stakeholders, especially the teachers and the principal, because they were the boots on the ground closest to the students. And I needed to make sure that that support was there at all times, always. Second, I liked how we could group our students in different cohorts based on various criteria. So because we have our ERDI data, we use that system also to group our kids by domains, by skilled gaps. And that's how we put the students into groups. And that's when the decisions were made between the 4-to-1 ratio, the 2-to-1, or 3-to-1. So for example, students who needed more help, they had the smaller ratios, right? And we did have some students who were put into 1-to-1 tutoring groups. For those that were showing 3 or more grade levels behind, we gave them 1-to-1 tutoring support. Also, the reporting is great. And the fact that I can present this data to everyone is not something that I take for granted. And it's a big reason why we went with Go Schoolbox to structure this programming. And then last, we all know that the ESSER funds are not unlimited. They're time bound. And we need data to determine which programs are working and which aren't. So when we have to make those decisions, because that time is going to come where we're going to have to choose between programs and services, we'll be able to do so using data. So let's look at our data now. On the left-hand side here, you will see a simple matrix. The horizontal axis and the school shows that School A received high dosage tutoring for most students. School B, you will see here, received some tutoring for some students. And School C did not provide any vendor-sponsored tutoring for students. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see our methodology for focusing on the certain cohorts of students to ensure we were comparing very like groupings of students. And we did use a linear mixed effects model, which means we captured both random and fixed events. You can see the timeline outlining the baseline assessment and the benchmark assessments administered at the various touch points to track student progress. All right, momentarily, I am going to turn the presentation over to Parsa to talk through the key findings in further depth. But at a very high level, I want to tell you that we are so excited about 3 key findings. First, we were able to reduce the typical summer slide with high dosage tutoring. So also because of the pandemic, we ran a longer summer school. Typically, we only run 16 days. This year in particular, we ran summer school in both June and July. And because of the success of the program, we continued with services over the summer. And the results that we got were amazing. And as Parsa mentioned earlier, in this building, we just received our letter grades a few weeks ago. This building went from an F, failing school, to now it's letter B. So we are so excited. Second, sustained high dosage tutoring helped students throughout the year, as evidenced by higher assessment scores. And then our third key finding was higher foundational domains of ELA scores, including mastering high frequency words, phonics, and even reading comprehension. With that, I will hand it over to Parsa.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Avila. I really appreciate it. I'm now going to take us into those three key findings in depth. And the first one that I want to focus on is this, not the eradication of the summer slide, but greatly dampening the adverse effects of students going home for the summer and then coming back in the fall at a significantly lower starting point than where the students ended in the spring prior. So if you take a look at this chart, I'll walk us through this here. This dark blue bar that you see, that's the testing point in April of 2021. So that's the end of year assessment that was administered to students. And the light blue bar, that's the beginning of year assessment in the fall of the same year. So different school year, same calendar year, spring of 2021 to fall of 2021. And you'll see that school A is on the left-hand side, then school B, school C. As a reminder, school A received that sustained high dosage tutoring. School B received this sort of opt-in, kind of unstructured tutoring. School C did not receive any tutoring that complemented the great work, the tier one, core instruction that was happening in the classroom. So as you'll see, there was still a drop off from the end of the year to the beginning of the year, but you can see that what we're trying to do is reverse the summer slide, and we got a lot closer to doing that with school A than we did with school B and school C. And that was really important because that will play into improvements over the next year and a half by allowing school A students to start at a higher point and then continue to accelerate. So this was a great outcome that we found. We're only discussing literacy today. Bit of a spoiler, Dr. Avila's rolled out tutoring for math at her district, also come to in-person instruction as well. So this time period was during COVID when schools were opening and closing and opening again and closing again. And so the students actually were physically in their seats in the classroom, but the tutors were beamed in virtually. So you had the best of both worlds. You had the lack of distractions at home or the difficulties, the obstacles that students have to go through at home, tied to the power of being able to have credentialed educators anywhere within the US with these tutoring companies that Dr. Avila used. I'm going to move on to the second key finding here. And if you have any questions about these, feel free to put them in the chat. Also, we'll pause at the end to take any questions, and Dr. Avila will be happy, I'm sure, to answer those. The second key finding is pretty simple. This sort of high dosage tutoring that checks off all the boxes as evidenced by the research and the report that Dr. Avila mentioned, simply improve ELA outcomes. And this improves ELA outcomes across all of these ELA subcategories, these English language arts subcategories. So this chart that you see has a slightly different timeline now. Now we see still the starting point of the spring of 2021, but we're comparing this to the spring of 2022. So think of this after a full year of dedicated high dosage tutoring focused on ELA and the positive outcomes as a result of that. And again, we're tying all of this in. So if we were to peel back the onion, we'd see subcategories including letter identification for the youngest students, high frequency words, phonics, all the way through reading comprehension and general vocabulary. And in a world in which a lot of students were actually going backwards in terms of their starting point and their ending points, again, because of all the difficulties during the pandemic, we saw school A make some steady progress with their students. School B, again, had some opt-in sort of tutoring, and they made a couple points gain, and then we saw actually school C decline. And Dr. Avila specifically chose these three schools because they were very similar in terms of all the other variables that she tried to keep constant when running this case study. I'm going to go into the third key finding here, and I really want to focus on the gains that were made faster. So as Dr. Avila mentioned, these ESSER dollars, there is a funding cliff that we are approaching. And so with a lot of school districts, they're trying to figure out how to get the best bang for their buck, but also in the most compressed timeline possible. And that's why we were really excited to show on that same timeline from spring of 2021 to spring of 2022 that if you take any of those subcategories in ELA, for example, vocabulary here, you will see that pronounced gain. And so it's all of these subcategories that tie into this overall improvement. I also want to double click on one thing that Dr. Avila mentioned earlier, which is that this slide, for example, touches on the ERDI scale score. And so ERDI is a lot of districts use iReady for progress monitoring, administered 3 times a year, but the vendors also administered their own assessments, the tutoring vendors. And then also there was the state assessment in Arizona, I believe, Dr. Avila, it was the AZ merit test. Yeah, now it's the ASA test. And so if you take a look at what's actually going on, if we had a little bit more time where we dig in, is that the high dosage tutoring is a double or a triple or a quadruple dose that helps to reinforce what's being taught in the classroom. So the teachers were actually welcoming of this high dosage tutoring at school A, because the classroom size for these 40 minutes during this learning lab time that Dr. Avila authored here was actually cutting the classroom in half, so students could log on with their headphones, and then when it was in person, the tutors would come in and work in very small groups, while the teacher then also got to work with a smaller group of students simultaneously. And the vendors that Dr. Avila chose, specifically one of the vendors for school A, actually aligned their already standards aligned curriculum to the curriculum maps of what the principal was asking for within the school site. So I want to be clear, it's not just the Go Schoolbox platform that helped and came manage the service providers or referred some vendors that would then apply to the RFP or whatever that would be, but it was actually Dr. Avila and her team at the central office and the school site principal and his staff at the school site that implemented with fidelity and were very intentional about setting their expectations for what a vendor would have to provide when coming into the school. And that's since scaled, I believe in Dr. Avila's district, about 10 or 11 schools to 3 or 4 schools and continually climbing. So the infrastructure that she's set up is used by a bunch of our district partners too, but she was one of the first. I believe she was actually the first district we worked with in the state of Arizona. So I know hindsight's 2020, but for those of you watching this and participating, it really was Dr. Avila and Isaac School District that really pushed this forward and paved the way for many other school districts to follow suit. I'm going to go into 2 last slides here, and this is because we've given a similar sort of presentation before in person, and a lot of people came up to Dr. Avila and said, this is all great, we are excited. Now, how exactly did you implement that from day 0? So I'm going to go over these bullet points that Dr. Avila and I put together. And then after that in-person presentation, it's funny, people will come up to me or came up to me and said, okay, Parsa, what exactly did you and Go Schoolbox do? Did you actually interface with these vendors, work with them, and take stuff off Dr. Avila's plate? Or is she just covering? And I just wanted to really emphasize the point that it's a true partnership. And so I'll talk about that as well and what the idea of a managed services provider approach means. But let's spend more time here on the slide prior. Sorry, let me click there. And starting in the top left-hand corner, this importance of measurement. So the first piece is the agreed upon assessment measures. I mentioned that Dr. Avila wanted to see all 3 assessments, these indicators pointing in the same direction. Some school districts will just entrust the vendor. Maybe they've worked with the vendor a while, like a Carnegie Learning, for example, that the district's entrusted with curriculum for a while and then is going to implement tutoring. But Dr. Avila wanted to make sure that she had a good sense of how the students would perform on the state assessments well before, March, April, May, when those assessments are given to students. The second is the centralized software. Dr. Avila wanted a one-stop shop to be able to see, for example, those 3 schools in the case study, how everyone is progressing or lack thereof. And especially within the same school, she wanted to have this sort of petri dish for innovation where she could try virtual tutors, in-person tutors, math, literacy, curriculum map aligned curriculum versus just standards aligned in the state of Arizona. And that gave her the ability to come to one place, one platform, and Go Schoolbox and see all of that. The next piece was the quality of programming. Dr. Avila is really good about really following the research and making sure things that she implements are evidence-based. And particularly right now where there's some differing opinions, I'd say, or differing ways of reading the report that came out by the Annenberg Institute from Brown on the topic of high dosage tutoring. There's a pretty clear checklist of what constitutes high dosage tutoring versus what might be a separate sort of tutoring approach. So Dr. Avila wanted to make sure that it was the same tutors meeting with the students. She mentioned she had 4 sessions a week for most students. Depending on how funding goes, that can decrease to 2 sessions or 3 sessions a week, whatever that might be. Instead of 40 minutes, it could be 15 minutes or 30 minutes. But she wanted to make sure that the tutors could build this relationship, this rapport with the students to overcome some of those traditional barriers that might prevent a student, even if it's subconsciously, from really digging into the learning. The second is the frequency of sessions was really important, especially if we are getting in a groove and this is supposed to be a recurring thing that produces results over time. That structure is very important. Dr. Avila mentioned push-in tutoring. So hers was during the school day. We've seen other districts do it before and after school, but especially if students are bused to and from school, or even if it's a one-to-one district in terms of devices, there might be one hotspot for the whole multi-generational household, which makes it pretty difficult. It's not quite a conducive learning environment if you expect students to log on, let's say it's 7, 8, or 9 p.m. for a session. So Dr. Avila can talk about that if folks have questions about how she was able to adjust the master schedule of the school to really incorporate that tutoring during the day. The third bullet you see here is about small groups. She didn't exceed 4-to-1 in terms of the student to tutor ratio. And she mentioned something that's really important. She was able to group students through the Go Schoolbox platform using the data from iReady and teacher input or school site principal and assistant principal input. To decide which students should receive 1-to-1 instruction, which should receive 4-to-1 instruction, and everything in between. So one thing that we're actually working towards is a more systematic approach. Is what if as soon as a student goes from 3 or more grade levels behind, catches up to within 1 year of where the student should be, let's say in reading proficiency, can that student be automatically put into a group of 2 or 3 students? So it's not like we're trying to take the student away from the one-on-one instruction, but the student is being reintroduced to that sort of small group setting as the student continues to climb back into being more or less in line with where we want the students to be. And ideally, this isn't something that we even have to think about. It's every 3 weeks or 6 weeks when the students are assessed with these micro data points, whatever the vendors do or whatever is implemented and assessed with iReady, for example, the student would be automatically put into this next tier or this next flow. And we already touched on the push-in tutoring piece, so I won't talk about that, but I will touch on the standards aligned curriculum. It's table stakes, or it's a no-brainer to require that if you have outside folks working with students at your district, that they should be using standards aligned curriculum. What we were able to do with Isaac School District is through the Go Schoolbox platform, have a plugin where all the content was preloaded. So it's not necessarily like a Zoom interaction like here where I come in and I share my screen and I'm clicking through slides. They're already tabs set up that the principal has already agreed to with the tutoring vendor. And so it's kind of hard for the tutors to mess up, if that makes sense. They come, they're trained, they're certified, they know which lessons that they're on and where to progress with the students. And then the curriculum is updated as the students make progress. I'm going to end now with this slide before we wrap up and open it up for questions. And this is the idea of a managed services provider. So one thing that we hear constantly is that educators have so much going on, whether it's at the school site or at the central office. And we wanted to be very sensitive to that. Dr. Avila did list out the laundry list of items that somehow she manages to accomplish on a daily basis. And that was a conversation Dr. Avila and I had very early on. And this was, again, 2+ years ago, or about 2 years ago, when our team was fewer than 10 people. Now we're almost 25 people. We have a fully dedicated customer success team that's boots on the ground. But Dr. Avila and I had the benefit of sitting down and just getting on the same page. And one of the things she said was she wanted insight into the really important things that she can use her position to really influence and really drive, such as the curriculum that's being used, such as the structure of the program. And she wanted me and my team at Go Schoolbox to focus more on the logistics, the implementation, and ironing out any obstacles that will inevitably come with the launch of a program, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person. So we at Go Schoolbox were actually interfacing with some of those vendors. So for example, districts will ask us to pull in certain vendors and implement a program and then track the progress. And that was no different here with these schools at the Isaac School District. So it was a true partnership, and we were always sensitive to the changing needs and direction of Dr. Avila at Isaac School District. With that, I will finish my section. And we do have some questions that we put on the next slide, but I think I'll pause there. And Dr. Ferrari, I'll toss it back over to you, because that's the end of the presentation portion of it, to see if we should go into QA or if you had something else in mind.
No, I just want to say thanks. It's always nice to see true collaboration happening, especially in a time of great need. So that's inspiring. And Erica and I go way back. We used to be consulting members at ERDI together. So it's just such a joy to see the progress and the success that you've had in your district. So kudos to you as a leader. It really starts with good vision, and clearly you've empowered your people to do great stuff. So thank you for that. I actually would love to open up to the group. Let's do this true ERDI style. If you even just unmute and ask questions, let's treat this more like a team meeting. And I do invite you to either offer feedback, questions, comments, things that are inspiring you, or just something to contribute to the conversation.
And I'll jump in real quick.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Hey, this is awesome, Erica and Parson, the whole team. I was curious when I looked at the three groups. You had the kind of the more all-in group, and then you had the opt-in, and then the third group. With the opt-in group, how did you get? And maybe I missed this, but how did you get like people to actually participate at a level that you could compare across groups? Because a lot of times with I think partnerships like this, when you have an opt-in group, it's kind of like, you know, do it as you want to do it, but it's not done with fidelity. What did you do on that front to make sure that you had comparable results between the opt-in group and the other two groups?
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you for your question. So for School B, it was tutoring services were offered, and the parents who wanted their students to participate filled out a permission form and sent it to the principal, and those students received pull-out services also during the school day with a different tutoring company. So it was the same number of days per week, same minutes, same ratios, but the parents chose, whereas School A, it was opt-out. Everybody's receiving tutoring. If you don't want them to participate, then you can opt out. That was the difference. Good question.
I have a quick question, and I will try to ask it in between my barking dogs. But I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit. Shoot, okay, sorry, we have construction workers here. I apologize. Can you explain how? Like, I'm unclear. Did you hire the tutors? How did that work? That relationship with the tutors and your school and your platform work, and how was the relationship with the tutors consistent and effective, and how big of a part did that play?
As Dr. Avila mentioned, there was an RFP that she ended up writing. So in this case, the managed services provider approach is what we went through. So Go School Box won a piece of the RFP and then had the ability to subcontract out the tutoring piece. So in this case, it's kind of the best of both worlds. The school district knows that Go School Box, our company, is on the hook for the quality and the actual fulfillment of the tutoring and the results, but we have the ability to bring in the best providers that we see because they're subcontractors of us. We don't provide the tutors, we don't provide the curriculum at Go School Box, which allows us to be impartial. The sort of, hey, we're Switzerland, we're just doing what's best for the district. So it is a very interesting, Cynthia, thanks for the question, interesting relationship, because the providers are really happy that we are subcontracting with them and providing them opportunities to service districts. But if the providers don't produce results or don't show up with the tutors that they promise or don't drive results, then what we'll do at Go School Box is sever that tie with that tutoring provider and then plug in another provider. So whether it's in-person or online, math or literacy, certain providers have their bread and butter, their go-to. And so Dr. Avila, what she did was she listed out what she wanted in terms of the outcomes for the students, and we worked backwards to pull in a provider or providers in this case. Did I miss anything, Dr. Avila?
Great. Well, I will say one more thing and then maybe get some other conversation going. What we've been hearing a lot about is this idea of gap closing, right? So the MTSS model is at its peak right now, and we're looking at it on the whole continuum from SEL to literacy to math to science and so forth. This seems like a really strong solution to really closing the gap for kids. I mean, even your A and B schools saw better results than not. And it seems like, how are the kids reacting to it? Are they pleased with the program? Are they enjoying it? What's the student feedback on that?
That's a great question. So I spoke a little bit about the qualitative feedback. So the students were asked to rate their session. You know, they can give comments, and they loved the program, the services, and then we had some of them set their own goals and then progress monitor themselves just to enhance really the outcomes. And they loved it because I read more comments about, I love my tutor's cares about me. So we also saw that feedback coming back. So we know that when students and teachers or tutors have relationships, right, they do better, they perform well. And so that was a key focus. So I have read nothing but positive in the qualitative feedback review. And then also our teachers, I almost want to say they loved it more than the students, because imagine as a teacher, we're coming back from the pandemic. There's tons of unfinished learning. And for 40 minutes, almost every day, you get to pause. The students log in and you can just work with 2 or 3 or one-on-one and really hyper focus on the learning of one or a few students. So the teachers loved it. I remember one person asked me, was there any resistance? What did the union say? What happened was the association was asking if we had money for more programs across sites. And so then, we started expanding. So it was really well received by the teachers, because how helpful is that? Somebody's helping you now close the skill gaps of the students in your classroom. That, who would say no to that, right? The teachers were just so grateful and appreciative.
That's so great to hear. We've heard a lot of union pushback on some of the tutoring. So that's really nice to hear that they see it as an extension of their own team, right? That's great. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to ask Erica if you could leave us with one piece of sage advice as we kind of tackle this next year of recovery and kind of closing the gap. What would you tell us?
I would tell you, be creative, think outside the box, and never take no for an answer.
I love it. Those are great last words. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us. Thanks to both of you for joining us today, and to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. It's just great to see your faces. And we do have another exec chat coming up next month. We'll be meeting with Dr. Quentin Shepard, who'll be talking about negotiations and the process of kind of engaging people of all stakeholders in that process. So I'm hopeful that you'll join us, and have a great rest of the day. Happy holidays, and we'll talk to everybody sooner than later.